The Mask in the Darkness. What if the world's most famous treasure wasn't just a heap of gold, but a message sent across 3,000 years? A challenge, a riddle, and a promise of immortality? Picture this. Deep beneath the hot sands of the Valley of the Kings, a flickering lantern stirs shadows on ancient walls, and the air is thick with secrets. A foreign archaeologist wipes sweat from his brow and kneels at a sealed doorway, knowing that on the other side waits either disappointment or a miracle the world has never seen. The age of empires is ending. The Great War is still fresh in memory. Europe is weary, hungry for wonder, desperate for something to believe in. But here in Egypt, the land of pharaohs and forgotten gods, another kind of war is being fought. A battle for memory, for glory, for the last untouched secrets of the ancient world. In the darkness, Howard Carter steadies his hands. For 5 long years, he has dug in the desert, defied skeptics, faced the threat of failure, ridicule, and ruin. All he has is hope, and a single, unbroken step cut into the rock. Now, with Lord Carnarvon waiting behind him and his Egyptian workmen crowding the passage, Carter takes a final breath and chips away the ancient plaster. The stone falls. Behind it, the darkness is not empty. It glitters with gold, gold everywhere, and the glint of eyes staring back through time. Carter raises a candle. The flame shivers, and for a moment the boy king himself seems to gaze out, serene and unbroken by centuries of silence. The world holds its breath. Carter whispers, "Yes, wonderful things. But what secrets sleep here? Who was this boy, Tutankhamun, whose face gleams beneath a mask of hammered gold? Why was his tomb lost and his name erased, only to be found now, when the world needs wonder most?" No one can answer, not yet. But the journey has begun. As Carter's team prepares to enter, Egypt's ghosts awaken. Priests and builders, thieves and mourners, kings and gods. Somewhere in the afterlife, the shade of Tutankhamun stirs, waiting to see if the living will finally hear his story. Not just the story of his gold, but the story of his soul. To understand King Tutankhamun, we must travel backward through time, sand, and shadow, past his tomb, his treasures, and his curse. We must find the child behind the mask, the world that made him, and the mysteries he left behind. This is not just the story of a discovery. It is the story of a kingdom torn apart, a boy made pharaoh, a death shrouded in rumor, and a legacy that refused to die. It is the story of immortality, the kind you can't measure in gold. Are you ready to step inside the tomb? Because once you pass through this door, the sands will never look the same again. What if your life began with a whisper of scandal, a world thrown into chaos by your father's impossible dreams? Imagine a kingdom where every temple bell has fallen silent, every god banished but one, and the old ways declared a lie. King Tutankhamun's story doesn't begin in gold, but in fire, fear, and a family on the edge of ruin. Before Tutankhamun, there was Akhenaten, the pharaoh who tried to break Egypt itself. The tale begins in Thebes, Egypt's ancient and sacred city. For 1,000 years, the priests of Amun had sung hymns to the hidden god and kept old faith alive in towering temples, their columns painted with the faces of kings and gods alike. The people offered sacrifices, filled the air with incense, and trusted that the old gods would bring order, the Nile's flooding, and the safety of the world. But then, in the 14th century B.C., a new pharaoh came to power, a prince named Amenhotep IV, whose mind was restless and whose heart was drawn not to many gods, but to a single blinding sun. He was tall, strange-looking, with delicate features and a distant gaze. Some said he was sickly. Others whispered he saw things no mortal should. Amenhotep IV, with his queen Nefertiti at his side, declared a revolution. He shut the doors of the old temples, seized their wealth, and forbade the worship of all gods but one, Aten, the sun disk, the visible light that gives life to earth. In a ceremony heavy with symbolism, the young king changed his name to Akhenaten, effective for the Aten, and proclaimed himself the sole prophet of a new religion. At his command, a new city rose from the desert, Akhetaten, modern Amarna, a capital built for the sun with palaces of white stone and open courtyards meant to drink the light of Aten. There, Akhenaten and Nefertiti ruled as living gods, surrounded by a court of artists, poets, and worshippers. The old images were smashed, names chiseled from walls, and the power of the priesthood shattered overnight. But what does a revolution feel like for those forced to live through it? In Thebes and Memphis, priests and commoners alike mourned the loss of their gods. Old men remembered the stories of Osiris and Isis. Women whispered forbidden prayers to Hathor in the dark. The Nile still rose and fell, but the air was charged with tension, rumor, and fear. Those who defied the new faith vanished into silence. Others bent their knees and played along, hoping the storm would pass. Even in the palace of Akhetaten there were shadows. Court intrigue swirled around the royal family, ambitious courtiers, angry priests, half-brothers and sisters watching from the margins. Nefertiti, legendary for her beauty, became the new faith's fiercest champion, appearing in public rituals beside her husband, worshipping the Aten with offerings of fruit, flowers, and song. But behind the public face, the royal household was troubled. Daughters sickened and died. Heirs disappeared from the record. Enemies gathered in foreign lands, and Egypt's empire began to crack at the edges. In this house of sun and silence, Tutankhamun was born. He arrived as Tutankhaten, the living image of Aten, a prince with the blood of kings, but the burden of revolution on his shoulders. His earliest days would have been spent beneath the painted ceilings of Amarna, in rooms lit by shafts of sunlight, courtyards echoing with the music of new hymns. He would have known the touch of his mother or a royal nurse, the coolness of stone under his feet, the anxiety that hummed in the voices of adults as the outside world grew more uncertain. Rumors of rebellion filtered through the palace. News arrived of famine, plague, and war. The gods of old, his ancestors, were spoken of only in whispers. Yet even amid this chaos, Tutankhamun was precious. Royal blood, a possible heir, a living hope that the dynasty would survive. The courtiers watched him grow. The priests waited to see which way the wind would blow, and in the dark of night, perhaps the young prince dreamed of a world less divided, a world where a boy might be both a child and a king. But peace would not last. The house of the heretic was destined to fall. As Akhenaten's reign stumbled toward disaster, the world that Tutankhamun would inherit was already crumbling. An Egypt torn between old and new, haunted by loss, and desperate for restoration. In the ruins of Amarna, a single flame still flickered, the promise of a child who might one day heal the wounds his father left behind. What if your first memories were of whispers and vanished faces, of gods you weren't allowed to name, and a city built on dreams that had already started to crumble? Tutankhamun was born into revolution, but it was in its ruins that he would truly learn to survive. Amarna, the city of the sun, was beautiful and fragile. White stone courtyards glimmered in the morning light, and colonnades stretched open to the endless sky. But for all its brightness, shadows pooled in the corners. Tutankhamun, or Tutankhaten as he was known then, grew up amid both privilege and uncertainty. His early childhood was shaped by absence as much as presence. His father, Akhenaten, was often consumed by state business, strange rituals, and feverish dreams. His mother, still debated by scholars, but perhaps the noblewoman Kia, or possibly Nefertiti herself, was either dead, missing, or relegated to the background, lost to time and the secret politics of the palace. The royal nurseries bustled with tutors and nurses, but many of the children Tut called siblings or cousins came and went like ghosts. Older sisters disappeared from records, half-brothers, potential rivals, were rumored to have died in suspicious circumstances. Servants moved quietly, their eyes averted, whispering prayers to gods whose names were now forbidden. Yet Tut was not alone. His half-sister, Ankhesenpaten, destined to become his queen, sometimes played with him in shaded gardens, chasing butterflies or rolling marbles made of painted clay. Together they watched the processions, Akhenaten and Nefertiti on golden chariots, leading crowds in praise of the Aten. The sun shone fiercely, but the air was tense. The city was ringed with soldiers and walls, ever wary of rebels, spies, or foreign threats. As he grew, Tutankhaten learned to read and write, using the new language of praise and poems to attend, but also, secretly, learning old stories and spells from nurses who remembered Egypt's forgotten gods. He saw artists painting only one royal family, his own, while older statues and inscriptions were smashed or buried. He listened to the priests who had managed to remain, their loyalty publicly for Aten, but their hearts divided. Behind closed doors, the adults argued in low voices. The city was running short of food. The treasury strained to pay for temples and palaces. Letters arrived from distant provinces, Hittite raids in the north, Nubian unrest in the south, old allies now enemies as Egypt's power faded. Sometimes at night, Tutankhaten heard the city's old men and women whisper prayers not to the Aten, but to Amun, Osiris, and the other gods of their ancestors. What does a boy do when every certainty is slipping away? Tut grew quiet, observant, cautious. He watched everything, how officials bowed, who lingered in corridors, which servants vanished and which returned. He learned not just the rituals of the new religion, but the ways people tried to keep hope alive in a world that had lost its center. He noticed that his father's health was failing, and that his stepmother Nefertiti, once ever present, grew more isolated and then seemed to vanish. The court itself was shrinking. Once crowded halls now echoed, and familiar faces faded, replaced by new favorites, new guards, new dangers. It was said that Akhenaten wandered the palace at night, tormented by visions, sick in both body and mind. By the time Tutankhaten was a young boy, the future of Egypt hung by a thread. The boy prince clung to his routines, lessons, games with Ankhesenpaten, rides in the gardens, occasional audiences where he was paraded as the living image of Aten. He studied the painted tombs of Amarna, bright, almost childish images of his family, picnics in the sun, joy and laughter that seemed, in reality, to be slipping away day by day. And then disaster struck. Akhenaten died, his end shrouded in mystery and rumor, the victim of sickness, or perhaps betrayal. The city of Amarna, built for a new world, began to empty. Courtiers, artists, priests, and laborers packed their belongings and slipped away in the night. Some returned to Thebes and Memphis, where the old gods waited. Others disappeared entirely, their names erased from history. And now, in the midst of confusion, the child Tutankhamun was left at the heart of a kingdom with no clear master, a fragile prince in a palace of ghosts. A council of elders and generals gathered to decide Egypt's fate. Some wanted to return everything to how it was before. Others feared the wrath of the gods, old and new. Tutankhamun, not yet a teenager, was too young to rule alone. Advisors moved into his world, the powerful vizier Ai, the general Horemheb, and the ambitious priests who saw a chance to restore their power. As the city emptied and the court divided, one truth became clear. The experiment of Akhenaten had failed. The gods, the people, and the land itself demanded a return to order. The boy who had become Tutankhamun was swept up in events far bigger than himself, his destiny shaped by the tides of history and the ambitions of those who saw in him both a tool and a hope for the future. In the gathering twilight of Amarna, Tutankhamun looked toward Thebes, a city he barely knew, a throne he had not chosen, a country that would soon ask everything of him. The journey of the boy king was about to begin. Chapter 3. Pharaoh at 9. What if your childhood ended overnight? Imagine being 9 years old and suddenly the whole world is watching, waiting for you to save a kingdom torn apart by your father's dreams. For Tutankhamun, there was no gentle path to power, just a crown, a throne, and a nation desperate for hope. The journey from Amarna to Thebes was both physical and spiritual, a migration from a fading utopia back to Egypt's ancient heart. Tutankhamun and his retinue, a small, anxious caravan, traveled through the dust and heat, their wagons loaded with what remained of the court. The abandoned city of Akhenaten loomed behind them, its temples empty, its painted walls already starting to crack and fade beneath the unforgiving sun. Every mile toward Thebes brought the past closer. Fields became greener, temples more numerous, and the language of the people shifted from the new hymns of the Aten back to the old prayers, murmured at dusk and dawn by farmers and priests alike. For the people of Egypt, the return of the royal family meant hope and fear. What would the new regime bring? Would the gods forgive the heresies of the past, or would Egypt continue to suffer? Tutankhamun, the frail boy, rode in a chariot beside his half-sister and soon-to-be queen, Ankhesenpaten. The adults whispered around him, the vizier Ai, gray-bearded and cunning, the general Horemheb, broad-shouldered and sharp-eyed, priests in linen robes, their shaven heads bowed in calculation rather than prayer. All saw in Tut a living symbol, a chance to restore balance and reclaim Egypt's place among the world's great kingdoms. In Thebes, preparations began for a coronation both joyful and haunted. The temples, long closed, were swept clean. Statues of the old gods were rescued from hiding, bathed in scented oils and garlanded with lotus flowers. Scribes hastily added Tutankhamun's name to the royal lists, careful to erase the memory of Akhenaten wherever possible. Messengers sped up and down the Nile, summoning local rulers, priests, and nobles to witness the return of Mayat, the sacred order of the universe, through a new king. The day of the coronation dawned bright and clear. The people gathered in the great forecourt of the Temple of Karnak, their voices rising in a roar that mingled hope, relief, and fear. Trumpets blared, dancers spun in circles. Offerings of bread, beer, and flowers were piled high before the altar. Tutankhamun, dressed in linen and gold, was led forward by priests and courtiers. His face was solemn, his eyes wide and searching. Ankhesenaten stood beside him, regal in her youth, a steady presence as the old gods returned to their altars. The high priest intoned the ancient prayers. Scribes painted new cartouches on papyrus, names that would bind the boy to both the gods and the land. In a ritual as old as Egypt itself, the young king was crowned not as Tutankhaten, but as Tutankhamun, the living image of Amun. The symbolism was clear and public. The worship of Aten was over. The old gods reigned again. Priests wept with relief. The crowd chanted his new name, lifting their arms to the rising sun, as if by sheer hope they could conjure a better future. But the boy on the throne knew little of power. He was still small, still uncertain. Every word he spoke was rehearsed by tutors, every move guided by Horemheb, and the priests. Every day was filled with ritual, lesson, and ceremony, his private hours rare and precious. Behind every order, every law, was the hand of another. Yet Tutankhamun learned. He watched, listened, and remembered. What must it have felt like to be both a symbol and a child? Tut's chambers were filled with tutors teaching not just language and math, but the old myths, histories, and sacred secrets. He learned to listen to the voices of the gods and the people, to smile at the right time, to speak the words that would please the priests, generals, and the court. He learned to sign decrees that he barely understood. Yet he also learned empathy, hearing the petitions of ordinary Egyptians, the stories of famine and hope, the questions of children his own age who had lost family and faith in the years of chaos. Every morning, Tutankhamun walked through the halls of Thebes, past the massive pillars of Karnak, past statues of Amun that had survived years of hiding. The priests guided him, reminding him at every turn of the weight he carried, Egypt's future, and the redemption of a troubled dynasty. In the first years of his reign, Tutankhamun was less a ruler than a vessel for others' ambitions. Yet, within him, quietly, a new strength began to take root. He was not his father. He would not be a puppet forever. The court swirled with intrigue. And Horemheb vied for power. Priests jockeyed for favor. Nobles sent gifts, bribes, and promises. At night, in his private rooms, Tutankhamun whispered his fears to Ankhesenamun, the only one who truly knew what it meant to be both young and crowned, to be surrounded by expectation, but haunted by loneliness. And so, at 9 years old, Tutankhamun sat on the throne of Egypt, a kingdom yearning for restoration, the hopes of millions resting on his slight shoulders. The boy king's true reign had only just begun. Chapter 4. Restoring Makayat. What if you were crowned to heal a world you didn't break? What if every day as a child you were called upon to restore not just temples and laws, but hope itself? For Tutankhamun, the first years as Pharaoh were a tightrope between childhood and destiny, where every decision echoed with the demands of gods and mortals alike. Egypt's wounds ran deep. Years of upheaval had left the temples abandoned, the priests scattered, and the common people fearful that their suffering was a punishment from the gods. The Nile had not flooded reliably in several seasons, and rumors of famine and plague drifted through the cities like morning mist. The young king's advisers, wizened and diplomatic, Horemheb, strong and unyielding, and a small army of priests, understood that Tutankhamun's first duty was not just to rule, but to make Egypt whole. The work began with the temples. In cities up and down the Nile, crews of laborers, artists, and priests returned to sacred spaces left to crumble during Akhenaten's heresy. Statues of Amun, Osiris, and Mut were dragged from hidden caches and placed once more in their shrines. Old hymns, remembered by only a few, were taught anew to choirs of boys and girls who had grown up in silence. On festival days, Tutankhamun was paraded through Thebes, a living link between people and gods. He poured libations at Karnak and Luxor, scattered lotus petals into sacred lakes, and watched as the priests performed rituals of purification and renewal. Yet the restoration of Ma'at, cosmic order, was more than ceremony. Tutankhamun, guided by his counselors, issued decrees in both the ancient and new capitals. He commanded the reopening of temple workshops, ordered grain relief for starving villages, and forgave taxes for farmers whose fields had failed. He listened to reports from every corner of Egypt, learning quickly that peace was as fragile as the new lotus blossoms on the river. The new royal family, too, became a symbol of hope. Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun were young, but their presence at public events offered the people a glimpse of innocence and continuity. The queen, barely a teenager, learned to carry herself with grace, bowing to elders and blessing children. Their marriage, like so much in their world, was both tradition and survival, a way to unite royal bloodlines and present a united front to the fractious court. But within the palace, politics was a dangerous dance. Ai and Horemheb were not merely guardians, but rivals, each seeking to shape policy and secure influence over the boy king. Priests jockeyed for access and whispered their grievances about lost lands and privileges. Scribes, architects, and army officers weighed every royal command for signs of favor or warning. Tutankhamun watched, listened, and learned. He realized that every word could change the balance of power. Every gesture was both a promise and a threat. What did he feel in those early days of kingship? At times, he was lonely, surrounded by crowds, yet unsure whom to trust. He longed for play, for friends, for the normal chaos of boyhood. But he also felt the first sparks of pride, the city cheering as he rode past in his chariot, the hush that fell when he entered the temple, the quiet thanks of a farmer whose debts were forgiven. As Egypt's wounds slowly healed, the court dared to hope again. Festivals filled the city with color and music. The markets bustled with trade. The riverbanks bloomed with new life. Yet always beneath the surface there was tension. The memory of the Aten still haunted some hearts. The gods had been restored, but would they forgive? Would Egypt ever truly return to the old order? Or was something new being born? In the private gardens of the palace, Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun sometimes escaped the weight of their titles, walking in the dusk beneath sycamore trees, talking of things only children understand, fear and hope, memory and dreams, the wish that the future might be kinder than the past. So the boy king grew, slowly, painfully, triumphantly. He was not yet strong, not yet fully master of his fate. But with every ritual, every decree, every careful step along the banks of the Nile, Tutankhamun began to turn from a symbol into a ruler. And the world, sensing the change, waited to see if Egypt's gamble on a child would save them or doom them once more. Chapter 5. Marriage and Growing Up. Royal, what if the only person who understood your burdens was the one forced to share them? Imagine growing up in a palace of 1,000 rooms, where every luxury hides 1,000 rules, and your best friend, your confidant, and your spouse is the same person. For Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun, marriage was not just duty or tradition. It was survival in a world where childhood and innocence vanished before their eyes. They were both children of chaos, born in Amarna, raised in the shadow of gods who had vanished, and a father's legacy that was both blessing and curse. Their marriage, sealed soon after Tutankhamun's coronation, was a union of necessity as much as affection. Cousins by blood and soulmates by fate, they were thrown together not just as king and queen, but as survivors of the same broken story. The royal wedding was a grand affair, held in the reawakened temples of Thebes. Priests recited ancient vows. Dancers wove between columns garlanded with lotus and papyrus. Music echoed off painted walls. Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun exchanged jewelry instead of rings, symbols of unity, and the goddess Hathor's blessing was invoked with incense and song. But what was life truly like for Egypt's youngest rulers when the festivities ended? In the mornings, they awoke before dawn. The palace staff, eunuchs, nurses, scribes, bustled through their chambers, helping them dress in linen and gold. Tutors arrived for lessons, law, mathematics, language, and etiquette. Scribes brought petitions from across the land. Breakfast was fruit, honey cakes, bread, and beer, served by servants who never met their gaze. After lessons, the couple walked together in palace gardens, their steps accompanied by guards and watchful officials. Sometimes they snuck away just for a moment, to talk alone, to chase birds by the fountains, to remember who they were before their names became the property of Egypt. Afternoons were filled with audiences. Nobles, priests, merchants, and foreign envoys brought gifts and complaints. Tutankhamun sat on a golden throne, his feet barely touching the floor, reciting decisions whispered to him by Ai or Horemheb. Ankhesenamun, though quiet in public, watched every face, learning which courtiers schemed, which ones feared, which ones might be trusted. At sunset, the palace shifted. Musicians filled the halls with harp and flute. Scented oil lamps flickered on painted scenes of gods and kings. Dinners were elaborate: roast fowl, fish from the Nile, vegetables, and wine. The conversation was careful, always aware that every word could travel farther than the walls. Yet, in the privacy of their apartments, Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun were still young. They played senet, the ancient game of fate, betting with beads or painted shells. They raced in the gardens, challenged each other to riddles, told stories from their childhood, and tried, if only for an hour, to forget the weight of their crowns. They spoke of dreams, children they hoped for, places they longed to see, a time when the world might be peaceful enough to simply live. But shadows lingered. The court was full of rivals, I, ever patient, Horemheb, restless and ambitious. Priests divided between gratitude and suspicion. Messages from distant provinces brought news of unrest, bad harvests, and dangerous neighbors. Every miscarriage Ankhesenamun suffered was mourned quietly, the grief hidden behind public smiles. Every decision was judged not just for its wisdom, but for what it might reveal about the young couple's strength or weakness. Some nights, Tutankhamun walked the corridors alone, staring at the moonlit city from high terraces, wondering if he would ever be remembered for more than his father's mistakes. Ankhesenamun, meanwhile, prayed in hidden corners, leaving offerings for the gods she had learned to trust and fear. They were not alone, but loneliness haunted them. Friendship was rare, laughter precious. Every gesture of affection, an exchanged glance, a shared secret, a gentle touch, became a rebellion against the machinery of the court. And so, the young king and queen grew up together side by side, navigating a world of ritual, danger, and expectation. Their love was not always easy, but it was real, a light in the labyrinth of palace intrigue, a promise that whatever fate brought, they would face it as one. In the years that followed, Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun would face more trials, illness, political storms, the shifting tides of Egypt's fate. But in those early days of marriage, they found a kind of fragile happiness, the hope that together they could heal not just a kingdom, but each other. Chapter 6. Health, Mystery, and the Royal Court. What if your greatest enemy was hidden not in the shadows of your palace, but in your own bones? Imagine living every day as a king and a child, carrying the weight of gods and ancestors, while pain and weakness crept into your body, never letting you forget how fragile your hold on life truly was. Tutankhamun's body was a palace of secrets. From the beginning, he was smaller than other boys his age, delicate, with slender limbs, a slightly elongated skull, and a noticeable limp. Physicians and priests attributed these signs to the will of the gods or the legacy of royal blood, but in private, the palace doctors worried. In a family already plagued by illness, any sign of frailty was cause for alarm. Modern science would reveal the truth millennia later. Tutankhamun suffered from a series of hereditary conditions, likely caused by generations of royal inbreeding. He had a club foot, possibly a cleft palate, and evidence of malaria and other chronic illnesses. Ancient physicians, with their limited knowledge, could offer only comfort, massages, herbal poultices, spells, and prayers. Incense burned day and night in his chambers, and amulets hung from his neck and wrists, each promising healing or protection. Every morning, the young king's attendants helped him rise and dress, careful not to press too hard on his swollen joints or disturb his aching bones. Some days he walked unaided. On others, he leaned on a staff or was carried in a litter to fulfill his duties. Ankhesenamun, ever watchful, learned to hide her worry behind a queen's serene smile. But weakness was dangerous in Egypt's royal court. Rumors swirled with every sign of ill health. Priests debated whether Tutankhamun's suffering was punishment for his father's heresy or a test sent by the gods. Courtiers whispered about the future. Would the king survive to produce an heir? Was the dynasty doomed to fail? Each cough, each stumble, each absence from a public ceremony became fuel for the ambitions of others. Behind the scenes, I and Horemheb jockeyed for influence. I, the old vizier, positioned himself as a father figure, a source of stability and advice. Horemheb, a seasoned general, made certain the army remained loyal, ready to step in should the king's strength falter. Both men knew that if Tutankhamun could not rule, Egypt would need someone else to hold the center, perhaps a regent, perhaps a new king. Tutankhamun, for his part, tried to prove himself. He presided over ceremonies even when he was feverish. He listened to reports, learned statecraft, and showed mercy to petitioners, hoping that wisdom would make up for what his body could not. But he also felt the pressure, the sense that every move was observed, every decision scrutinized, every mistake magnified by the enormity of his role. What did Tutankhamun fear most? Perhaps it was not death, which came for everyone, but the thought that he would be remembered as a failure, a puppet, a symbol, a king who could not control his fate. In private moments, he confided in Ankhesenamun, sharing his pain and frustration, dreaming of days without pain, of children playing in the palace gardens, of a life that belonged to him, not just to history. The palace itself was a place of contradictions, beautiful, but full of hidden dangers. Walls had ears. Trusted servants reported to Ai or Horemheb, or even to foreign spies. Physicians and magicians competed for access to the king, sometimes more interested in courtly advancement than healing. The air in the royal chambers was thick with incense, secrets, and anxiety. Yet even in his struggles, Tutankhamun inspired loyalty. Many in the court admired his determination, his kindness, his willingness to listen. Ordinary Egyptians, hearing tales of his public generosity, sent prayers for his health. Festivals and rituals invoked the gods' blessings for their young pharaoh. In art and poetry, Tutankhamun was depicted as a strong, wise, and divinely favored ruler, an image that comforted the people and masked the truth that, beneath the gold and ritual, he was a young man fighting for every day. And so the king lived and ruled and struggled. His reign was both a triumph and a tragedy, a dance between hope and fear, strength and weakness, faith and uncertainty. The greatest danger was not always in the enemy's spear, but in the slow, silent battle within his own flesh and blood. As the years passed, Tutankhamun's health would only become more precarious, and the pressures on him and his queen more intense. But for now, the court held its breath, watching and waiting, hoping that the boy king's courage would be enough to save not just himself, but all of Egypt. Chapter 7. The Death of a King. What if your story ended before you could shape it? Imagine a king whose youth was spent healing his father's wounds, whose body failed him even as he struggled to fulfill the hopes of millions. For Tutankhamun, the end came not on a battlefield or in the glare of public life, but in the silent, shadowed rooms of his palace, leaving a mystery that would baffle the world for thousands of years. The last months of Tutankhamun's life were marked by a quiet desperation. He was not yet 20, barely more than a boy, yet his body had become an old man's. The physicians could do little. Their ointments and prayers offered only fleeting relief. The king, so often seen limping or carried in a litter, now spent days in bed, pain etched into his features. Ankhesenamun rarely left his side, tending to him with a gentleness born of love and grief. Outside the royal apartments, the court sensed change. Whispers grew louder in the corridors. Priests and generals debated succession in shadowy alcoves. I, ever patient, offered comfort to the queen and read prayers at the king's bedside. Horemheb reviewed the loyalty of the garrisons and counted his allies among the officer corps. The fate of Egypt, as always, hung on the survival of one fragile life. Theories abound about what killed Tutankhamun. Some ancient sources suggest an accident, a chariot crash, a hunting wound, a fall from a horse. Others speak of a sudden fever, perhaps malaria or an infection from an old injury that would not heal. Modern science, peering into the bones of the boy king with X-rays and DNA, finds clues, but no final answer. A broken leg, signs of malaria, a weakened immune system, even hints of genetic disease. There are darker whispers, too, rumors of poison, of murder in the night. Did I, the ever-watchful vizier, hasten the king's end to secure his own claim to the throne? Did Horemheb see a chance to seize power? The evidence is tantalizing but inconclusive. The truth lies buried with Tutankhamun, locked behind gold and silence. What is certain is this: The death of Tutankhamun sent shock waves through Egypt. In the palace, servants wept quietly. Priests, dressed in black, chanting ancient prayers for the safe passage of the pharaoh's soul. The queen, Ankhesenamun, was left childless, her future uncertain and surrounded by powerful men with their own ambitions. In the temples and cities, the news was met with dread. The people feared that the return of the old gods had not been enough, that Egypt's suffering would continue without a strong divine king to intercede for them. Grain prices soared, border towns whispered of invasion, and the old anxieties crept back into every home. The rituals of royal death began immediately. The king's body was washed in sacred oils, his wounds, old and new, anointed with balms and wrapped in fine linen. Magicians and embalmers spoke spells to guide his spirit, placing amulets and charms between each layer of cloth. Priests read passages from the Book of the Dead, asking the gods to forgive Tutankhamun's youth, his family's heresies, and any mistakes left unrighted. The burial, too, was hurried and troubled. Tutankhamun had not ruled long enough to build a grand tomb. The Valley of the Kings was filled with the silent witnesses of dynasties past, kings who had prepared for death for decades. Tutankhamun's tomb, by contrast, was small, carved in haste, meant perhaps for a lesser noble. Yet it would hold the greatest treasure the world had ever seen. As the procession moved through the darkness, carrying the golden coffin, the world seemed to hold its breath. The walls of the burial chamber were painted with scenes of Tutankhamun's journey to the afterlife. Anubis guarding the tomb, Osiris waiting to judge the heart of the boy king. Offerings of food, wine, and clothing were piled high, and the innermost chamber was sealed in secrecy. Outside, the living argued, schemed, and grieved. I, moving quickly, married Ankhesenamun and claimed the throne for himself. Horemheb waited in the wings, gathering his strength, and Egypt, once again, faced an uncertain future. Tutankhamun was gone, but his story was just beginning. In death, he would become more famous than he had ever been in life, a symbol of lost innocence, ancient glory, and the secrets that time could never quite destroy. Chapter 8. The Tomb of Shadows. What if the place meant to hide you forever became the very thing that made you immortal? Imagine your body sealed in darkness by anxious hands, treasures piled high to guard your soul, and your name nearly forgotten as centuries slipped by outside your walls. For Tutankhamun, death was not the end. It was the start of a legend buried in shadow. The Valley of the Kings was silent, the stones still warm from the late summer sun, as Tutankhamun's funeral procession wound its way through narrow canyons and ancient graves. The king's body, mummified and wrapped in linen, lay in a golden coffin shaped like a god. Priests chanted spells, their voices echoing in the dusk, and courtiers, some loyal, some eager to move on, carried jars, food, weapons, and painted chests for the afterlife. But even in death, Tutankhamun was at the mercy of fate. His tomb was small by royal standards, carved quickly and poorly decorated compared to the grand vaults of his ancestors. Some said it had been intended for another. Others whispered that the king's sudden passing had forced his builders to take what space they could find. The walls, hurriedly painted, glowed with scenes of Tut's journey into the next world. He greeting Osiris, embraced by Anubis, presented before the assembled gods for judgment. Yet inside, the tomb was filled with wonders, gold couches shaped like divine beasts, alabaster jars painted with ancient prayers, gilded thrones inlaid with scenes of Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun in moments of rare tenderness. Hundreds of everyday objects, sandals, chariots, archery bows, board games, and food for the journey were crammed into the small chambers stacked to the ceiling, as if the living hoped that, by sheer abundance, they could buy favor from the gods and soothe the spirit of a boy who never had time to prepare for death. The burial itself was fraught with anxiety. The new king, eager to secure his own position, presided over the ceremonies with a careful blend of piety and ambition. Some rituals were rushed, others performed twice, as if to erase the memory of the heresy that had haunted Tutankhamun's family. The priests sealed the tomb with curses and prayers, placing magical bricks and scarabs to guard against thieves and evil spirits. And then the door was closed, the entrance hidden, and silence fell. Outside, the world moved on. Ai's reign was short and uneasy. Horemheb soon claimed the throne, determined to erase the memory of Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and all the chaos of the previous years. The names of the boy king and his queen were chiseled off monuments, their statues smashed or hidden. Egypt, eager for stability, let Tutankhamun fade into the long, slow memory of the land. For centuries, robbers prowled the Valley of the Kings. Many tombs were looted and destroyed, their treasures lost to fire, greed, or the desert winds. But somehow, through luck, obscurity, or the careful concealment of loyal hands, Tutankhamun's tomb remained almost untouched. The sand drifted over the entrance, and the world forgot. What secret slept in that darkness? Within the tomb, time passed differently. The painted walls faded, the wooden chests dried and cracked, the linen shrouds turned to dust, but the gold remained, the boy king's face gazing out from behind his mask, serene and untouched. The jars of honey and wine crystallized, food offerings dried into fragile relics. The air was heavy with stillness, a hush that lasted for more than 3,000 years. Outside, empires rose and fell. Rome conquered Egypt, and the old religion gave way to new gods. Alexandria flourished, burned, and vanished. The names of pharaohs became mysteries, their languages forgotten, their temples swallowed by sand and stone. But somewhere beneath the earth, the spirit of Tutankhamun waited, guarded by lions of gold and painted gods. His tomb a silent promise that one day someone would find him and ask, who was the boy behind the mask? The Tomb of Shadows became a time capsule, a message in a bottle cast onto the endless ocean of history. And when it was finally opened, the whole world would look inside and remember the child king who, in dying, became eternal. Chapter 9. Egypt after Tutankhamun. What if your story was wiped away on purpose? Your name chiseled off walls, your statues buried, your very existence denied by those who came after? For Tutankhamun, death was just the beginning of a second struggle, not for glory, but for memory itself. The sealing of Tutankhamun's tomb marked the end of a chapter and the start of another. No sooner had the boy king entered eternity than Egypt's powerful survivors began rewriting history to suit their needs. The old vizier, took the throne first. He had been the power behind Tutankhamun's reign, a master of survival who had lived through the rise and fall of the heretic Akhenaten, and now he wore the double crown. Hurried to secure his claim, marrying the young widow Ankhesenamun in a political union that brought her little joy and him little legitimacy. Their brief reign together was marked by tension. Rumors flew that Ankhesenamun, still mourning Tutankhamun, had even sent desperate letters to foreign powers, seeking rescue from A's ambitions. But she vanished from history, her fate a riddle lost in the shadows of the palace. A was old. He ruled only a few years before he too died, leaving Egypt without a clear heir. Into this vacuum stepped Horemheb, the ambitious general who had commanded the armies during Tutankhamun's reign. Unlike his predecessors, Horemheb had no royal blood, but he had military strength and the loyalty of the priesthood, desperate for order after years of chaos. Horemheb's reign changed everything. He set out to restore Egypt's greatness and erase the memory of the turbulent years. He destroyed the monuments and images of Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and Tutankhamun. He scratched their names from stelae, removed their likenesses from temple walls, and reassigned their achievements to himself. The world was to believe that the heretic kings and their children had never ruled, that Horemheb was the restorer of Ma'at and the rightful heir of the ancient gods. The city of Amarna was abandoned to the desert, its palaces and temples falling to ruin. Even the memory of Akhenaten's revolution was suppressed, preserved only in scattered fragments and whispered stories. Ankhesenamun, Tutankhamun's beloved queen, was erased as thoroughly as her husband, her tomb lost, her name remembered only in the rarest records. In the centuries that followed, Egypt was transformed again and again. The Ramesside pharaohs, descended from Horemheb's chosen successors, took up the scepter. Great kings like Seti I and Ramses II built colossal temples, conquered foreign lands, and filled the Valley of the Kings with their own dazzling tombs. The memory of the boy king was buried under layers of new glory, his treasures undisturbed while others were plundered, his story untold while others became legend. The silence lasted for thousands of years. Time is a patient thief. Sand drifted over Tutankhamun's hidden door, sealing him deeper with each passing century. Priests died, languages changed, the old stories were lost. Greeks and Romans wandered the ruins, marveling at statues and broken columns, never guessing what lay beneath their feet. Christian monks built chapels atop the sacred valleys. Grave robbers tunneled into tombs and vanished in the darkness, sometimes missing Tutankhamun's resting place by inches. Even as the world forgot him, Egypt changed. Persians, Greeks, and Romans ruled the Nile. The old gods gave way to new faiths. Alexandria became a beacon of learning and trade, but the ancient capital of Thebes crumbled, its treasures lost or scattered. By the time Arab scholars and European explorers arrived, the memory of Tutankhamun had faded to dust. But not everything was lost. In his tomb, the boy king slept surrounded by golden prayers, the air heavy with dreams and silence. The spells written on his coffin promised that he would live again if his name were spoken. And somewhere, in the memory of the land, the spirit of Tutankhamun waited, patient as the desert, for someone to find him and remember. The stage was set for a discovery that would stun the world. A door sealed for 3,000 years, waiting for the right hands, the right eyes, and the right questions. Tutankhamun was gone, but his time would come again. Chapter 10. Lost for 3,000 years. What if your whole life, your triumphs, failures, and secrets were hidden so completely that the world came to believe you never existed? For Tutankhamun, death was followed by a second burial, the deep, patient forgetting of the ages. But sometimes, what's most carefully hidden becomes the greatest treasure of all. After the burial, The door to Tutankhamun's tomb was sealed with plaster, daubed with royal curses and spells, and the entrance disguised by workmen eager to avoid the attention of robbers. Even so, danger lurked. The Valley of the Kings had long been a magnet for thieves, both bold and desperate, their picks and chisels echoing by moonlight through the hills. But luck, or perhaps divine protection, stood watch over the boy king. Only a few decades after Tutankhamun's funeral, construction of a nearby tomb may have buried the entrance to his forever. Workers, moving earth and rubble for the tomb of Ramses VI, unknowingly covered Tutankhamun's doorway with debris, hiding it even from those who would have plundered it. Other tombs were not so lucky. Grave robbers tunneled and stripped them, seeking gold, jewelry, or sacred oils to sell in the city markets. Kings who had ruled for 50 years were left with nothing but dust and bones. Priests who had once commanded the nation's wealth were now remembered only by broken statues. Generations passed. Occasionally, a new pharaoh sent officials to check on the royal tombs, repairing entrances and reinscribing curses. Sometimes thieves were caught and punished. Sometimes the guards were bribed or looked the other way. In the end, no one could keep the valley secure. Over the centuries, storms and landslides buried entrances, and new tombs were cut atop the old, further confusing any would-be looters or archaeologists. The years tumbled forward. The memory of Tutankhamun, already faint, was erased from the records. His name appeared nowhere in the great king lists of later dynasties. No temple bore his image. Amarna, his father's capital, was abandoned and its stones used for other buildings. For the world, Tutankhamun was not even a rumor. And so the tomb slept. But Egypt was not a land that forgot easily. From time to time, stories of hidden kings and lost treasures surfaced. Ancient Greek travelers told wild tales about secret doors in the cliffs. Roman emperors took pieces of statues and mummies as souvenirs. Christian monks moved into the valleys, painting crosses on the walls and sometimes unknowingly preserving the very paintings they meant to erase. The Valley of the Kings became a place of ghosts. Wandering Bedouins camped among the ruined tombs, sometimes stumbling over odd-shaped stones or fragments of painted wood. Local guides spun tales for travelers of curses and magic, of spirits and lost gold. Some even found bits of pottery or scraps of linen, never guessing their true origin. Time does not erase everything. Tutankhamun's name, though missing from public monuments, survived on small objects, rings, scarabs, broken stelae, unearthed by farmers and explorers who did not know what they had found. Scholars puzzled over these relics, wondering at the king who came between. But the tomb itself held its peace. The centuries rolled on. The world outside changed. Rome fell. Islam came to Egypt. Cairo rose on the Nile. The language of the old kings faded into memory, decipherable only to priests, and eventually no one at all. Egypt's ancient temples were buried, her statues toppled by time, her gods worshipped only by the wind and sun. Still, the tomb waited. 3,000 years, empires rose and fell, and the modern age dawned. The valley was rediscovered by travelers from Europe, drawn by tales of gold and mystery. In the 18th and 19th centuries, explorers with picks, shovels, and dynamite searched for royal tombs, carting treasures away to fill museums in London and Paris. Tomb after tomb was found, looted, catalogued, and left empty. But one door, the smallest, lowest, most unassuming of all, remained buried beneath rubble, untouched. Tutankhamun waited, perfectly preserved, his story unknown, his riches unimagined. The silence before discovery is its own kind of drama, a pause so deep that when it ends, the world must change. And soon the sands would shift, and the world would remember the name it had lost for 3,000 years. Chapter 11. The Age of Exploration. What if the world's greatest secret was nearly lost, not just to time, but to greed, confusion, and the very people who searched for it? Imagine adventurers, scholars, and treasure hunters wander in Egypt's golden deserts, each convinced the past held answers, and one door, just underfoot, hiding the prize of the century. The 18th and 19th centuries brought Egypt back into the world's imagination. Napoleon marched his armies to the Nile, followed by scientists, artists, and collectors desperate for knowledge, and, more honestly, for treasure. The Rosetta Stone was found, its mysterious symbols promising a key to the forgotten language of pharaohs. Suddenly, the world was obsessed with mummies, pyramids, and lost dynasties. The Valley of the Kings, a maze of cliffs and tombs, became the destination of choice for every explorer, fortune seeker, and academic with a shovel. Giant statues were carted down the Nile. Paintings and jewelry vanished into private collections in London and Paris. Grave robbers still slipped through the rocks at night, sometimes finding more than the scientific expeditions did by day. Among the early searchers was Giovanni Battista Belzoni, a former circus strongman turned archaeologist. He hauled colossal statues out of the sand, cleared collapsed tombs, and mapped the valley with a showman's flair. Other names followed: Champollion, the genius who cracked the hieroglyphic code; Lepsius, who catalogued Egypt's ruins for Germany; Amelia Edwards, whose passionate writing inspired generations of Egyptologists. Still, many believed the valley had surrendered all its secrets. The tombs of Ramses, Seti, and Thutmose were found, sometimes plundered, sometimes remarkably intact. But in the feverish search for great kings, the modest, hidden resting place of a forgotten boy went unnoticed. Maps grew crowded with discoveries, but one small rectangular patch remained blank. By the dawn of the 20th century, the race had grown expensive and political. Permits to dig were tightly controlled by Egypt's new antiquities service. European and American museums competed for artifacts. Rumors swirled that a lost tomb still lay somewhere, untouched, in the heart of the valley. Some whispered about small finds: a cup with the name Tutankhamun, a golden ring in a Cairo market. But years of searching turned up nothing but more sand and disappointment. Enter Lord Carnarvon, a wealthy British aristocrat with a taste for speed and danger, cars, airplanes, gambling, and eventually Egyptology. He funded a series of digs, first as a hobby, then as a mission. To direct his search, he hired a determined, meticulous archaeologist, Howard Carter. Howard Carter was not a gentleman by birth, but he was relentless, tireless, and deeply respectful of Egypt's past. While others saw gold, he saw stories. For years, he mapped the valley, recording every scrap of pottery, every chip of stone. He noticed patterns, absences, the negative spaces other searchers ignored. He became convinced that a tomb still lay hidden, one belonging to a little-known king whose name occasionally surfaced on minor objects: Tutankhamun. The years stretched on. Carter and Carnarvon spent fortunes and faced ridicule. Other teams gave up, declaring the valley exhausted. But Carter's conviction never faded. By 1922, with funds running out and Carnarvon losing faith, Carter convinced his patron to finance one final season, one last chance. November 4th, 1922. Carter's Egyptian laborers cleared a patch of ground at the base of the tomb of Ramses VI. Their picks struck stone, a step. More digging revealed a staircase, then a sealed doorway stamped with the royal insignia. Carter's heart raced. Was it real or another false hope? He sent word to Carnarvon, then waited in agony. Days later, they broke the seal and peered through a small hole by candlelight. Gold glinted in the darkness. Statues and chariots shone in the flicker. Carter whispered the words that would thrill the world. Yes, wonderful things. The door to Tutankhamun's world was open at last. Chapter 12. The Discovery. If you were faced with failure after a lifetime of searching and ridiculing, but eventually opened only one door to find the world transformed forever, what would be your ultimate response? Imagine being the first person to stand where pharaohs once stood for 3,000 years and light up your lantern to awaken gold, mystery, immortality. Upon entering Tutankhamun's tomb, Carter witnessed the ancient world restoration. The moment was electric. While the sealed door was encircled by Carter, Carnarvon, and a few concerned officials, the air was filled with anticipation in the face, sweat in hand, or silence that lasted for miles. The ancient plaster was chipped away by Carter, who remained silent and felt both amazed but terrified, with shaken hands. What remained hidden until just beyond the surface? He inserted a candle into. The air is so stale it smells like old times for miles, and the air was too salty to breathe. Why, then it shines. Gold shimmer, ivory curves, gilded charioteers stacked up in the air, black and gold statues with painted eyes staring back at them. With his head raked, Carnarvon whispered, "Are you seeing anything?" Carter was overwhelmed and replied with a, "Yes, wonderful things." They widened the hole and then broke through it with great care, entering the antechamber, which was an unparalleled sight for them or anyone else. The walls lacked paint, but were filled with the chaos of the afterlife. Golden couches in beast shapes, elegant chests, sparkling jewelry, baskets and games plus weapons. The room was dusty gray. There was an abundance of gold shimmer. Time itself seemed to ripple. As they adjusted their gaze, they observed more. A pair of life-size guardian statues with serene faces and watchful eyes, shrines and chests, beds in the shape of lions or cows, both large and small, stacked so that the dead monarch could wake up and resume his earthly activities. Another closed space is present at the far corner, which is where you'll find the burial chamber. News of the discovery swept across Egypt and the world. From Luxor to London, messages were broadcasted in a flash through to New York. People assembled at the base of the valley as officials, reporters, and potential thieves scoured the area for a peek. Egypt's newly independent government, full of pride, insisted on enjoying the moment, ensuring that their own eyes witnessed what had been kept hidden for so long. Why is this? Carter worked in a methodical manner with the intention of honoring the tomb and its contents. Every item was photographed, categorized, wrapped, and taken away with great care. Weeks turned into months. The antechamber's riches were enough to amaze, but the greater marvels were located behind the neighboring property. Tension in the valley grew increasingly intense upon the day when the burial chamber was to be opened. Incense, prayers, and the weight of expectation filled a cramped space. Carter and his team broke the seal with little force. A quartzite sarcophagus, decorated with protective goddesses, is illuminated by lamplight and placed inside. The area was encircled by 4 shrines, each embellished with gold leaf and incantations. 3 golden coffins, with the innermost one being a stunning mask of solid gold, were concealed within the sarcophagus to depict the boy king's serene and eternal face. The treasures dazzled the world. Among the treasures are golden thrones, jeweled dagger tips, lotus crowns, amulets, perfumed jars, and clothing that remained soft after many years. An instant icon, the mask was a representation of allure, enigmatic qualities, and human longing for eternal life. As the treasures emerged, they were accompanied by questions. Why did Tutankhamun's tomb have so little depth? Quickly, why did it endure while others didn't experience its survival? What remained unnoticed about the king's life, death, and existence in the paintings and artifacts? Valley was filled with excitement, jealousy, and rumor. Some spoke of curses, others marveled at the artistry. Despite the slightest deviation, everyone recognized that the world had altered its direction. The story of a forgotten boy king who was resurrected and revived in ancient Egypt for epochs has been told. The sandstone had relinquished their protection, and the world would remain unchanged. Chapter 13. The Unwrapping. What emotions would arise if you were the first to encounter the face of a long-dead king whose secrets have been hidden by gold and darkness for over 3,000 years? How would you feel? Howard Carter and others viewed the unwrapping of Tutankhamun's mummy as more than just an archaic display. This was a suspended moment of science, honor, wonder, and intrusion, the living and dead. The unwrapping day was a day of great anticipation. The world was keeping tabs on everything that occurred in the Valley of the Kings by now. Newspapers were compelled to publish lurid stories about the Pharaoh's curse due to their desire for attention. Egypt's officials were present, demanding respect for their predecessor. In the burial chamber, Carter and his small team functioned in complete silence while concentrating on their sacred duty. The outer shrines and sarcophagus were first dismantled with meticulous documentation of each step. With each layer uncovered new wonders, golden lions, jeweled scarabs, and linen-wrapped bouquets of ancient flowers, signs for love and faith from a disused time, intolerance. The inner coffins were opened by Carter's team, who experienced a mix of excitement and fear. Finally, under sheets of fine linen, they found the iconic golden death mask, its calm face reflecting light and human hope, with its eyes searching through time with wisdom and sorrow that no other living being could equal. Death became an unavoidable reality beneath the mask. Tutankhamun's body, covered in resin cloth, was shrunken and stained black by mummification, but miraculously unharmed. Each layer concealed a unique prayer with charms and amulets. There was a dense covering of old incense, dried flowers, and the echo of hymns from before. The unpacking was a slow, respectful, and orderly process. Carter's hands were shaken not with fear, but with the understanding that every gesture connected 3,000 years. Each turn of the linen and every amulet found was noted, photographed, and drawn. Researchers debated the king's small stature, leg and skull injuries, as well as the scent of flowers, pure petals of orange blossom, that were pressed into his skin. Note 1. They finally reached the face. The golden mask of mythology was not the cause, but rather the ragged, haunting characteristics of a young man. High cheekbones, delicate jawline, lips split as if they were still whispering, lingering. What could be more serious? It was both embarrassing and unsettling. This boy was more than just a ruler, a person who is fated in the river of time, like those who came before and after them, not just as a symbol, but also dead. The announcement of the wrapping shook the world? Absolutely. A few wept over a perceived violation, while some relished the sight of ancient amulets, rings, and jewels that were unwrapped. Was the king's death caused by natural factors or from natural causes? Why does he have an abundance of walking sticks scattered around? Did his skull sustain an ancient injury, or was it the expedited process by embalming workers? Multiple theories were proposed, including malaria, infection, murder, and a chariot crash or genetic disease. Even with the commotion, Carter felt a sense of wonder and elation in his involvement with life and death. His journal entry revealed that they were struck with a sense of incredulity to see the face of king, child, and immortal at the same time. The trove was catalogued, sent to Cairo, and shown before stunned onlookers. Despite his humble and fragile nature, the boy became the most valuable treasure among all humans, serving as a mirror of human desires and anxieties, emphasizing that even the finest legend is ultimately deeply personal. The story continued in the quiet of the tomb, but the curse, the legacy, and how the world was obsessed with the boy king were just starting. Chapter 14. The Curse and the Craze. Is it possible that a secret unearthed from the beach had such an impact on not only ancient times, but also dreamlike qualities? Tutankhamun's tomb opened before the world turned face to face with gold and whispered words of a deadly curse. What happened next? This wasn't just archaeology. It constituted spectacle, rumor, and a new modern-day mythology. Carter's discovery was met with widespread coverage and headlines, with legend stating that it was the boy king's curse. Lord Carnarvon passed away unexpectedly in Cairo shortly after the tomb was opened, despite his financial and religious backing. A mysterious fever claimed his life, which was caused by an infected mosquito bite. A dreadful story was stirred by the world's hunger for it. The papers claimed that the king's sleepers would be subject to death, as they quoted an ancient warning on the tomb walls, although Carter and his team found no such message on any of the walls. Almost overnight, any misfortune linked to those associated with the tomb was transformed into evidence of supernatural vengeance within weeks. In Cairo, the lights went out at the exact moment of Carnarvon's passing. His dog, who had been back in England, was said to have howled and passed away at the same time. The expedition experienced accidents or premature deaths among other members. It was enough to convince the world that there was something ancient and powerful which still protected his rest. Most of those who went into the tomb survived to adulthood, and scientists and skeptics were incredulous. Several decades later, Carter passed away peacefully after documenting the tomb's treasures for the world to see. But the legend was unstoppable. Hollywood and the media relegated the mummy's curse to the status of a symbol that symbolized forbidden knowledge, tempting fate, and human curiosity. Tutmania swept the globe. Lines for blocks were drawn from museum exhibitions of Tutankhamun cherished items. The pharaoh's designs, such as scarves, cobras, and lotuses, were imitated in everything from hairpins to brooches. Writers penned intense narrative descriptions of cursed tombs and revived mummies. Egyptian style gained dominance in architecture, fashion, and nightclubs during the jazz era in Europe and America. The occult and supernatural became increasingly popular, with department stores selling out their tarot cards and Ouija boards. Children were pharaohs and queens who played as well. There was a dispute among scholars regarding the entire account of Tutankhamun's life and death. Movies facilitated the introduction of ancient culture to new audiences, and the Boy King's mask became a universally recognized icon that represented both beauty and mystery. But what was underneath that? Egyptians were both proud and hurtful after the rediscovery. Once sent to European museums, the treasures became a symbol of national pride. The preservation and exhibition of the king's possessions in Cairo, not in London or Paris, was sought by Egyptian archaeologists and government officials. Upon entering the tomb, a new group of people began to learn about their own past and held on to the memories of the names and faces that had been erased. For Carter, the years of work were bittersweet in a way. He achieved notoriety, but was also plagued by controversy and bureaucracy. The manner in which he performed it, his English nature, and his refusal to allow the tomb to be plundered by curious people were all subject to criticism. During the last years of his life, he meticulously documented thousands of items, protected the king's legacy from greed, superstition, and misunderstanding. The curse was still present, as evidenced by newspaper articles and films, and evident in the silence of every museum guard who walked through darkened corridors alone at night. The modern world had forgotten Tutankhamun's death, leaving him as a symbol of both beauty and sorrow, serving as an example of how history can never be erased or hidden. However, science was just starting to look for answers. How did the boy king die? What enabled the tomb to remain undiscovered for such a prolonged period? What was the actual significance of these treasures in Egypt's lost world during its discovery? Chapter 15. Science, Secrets, and DNA. What if the secrets of a 3,000-year-old king could be revealed not by priests or pharaohs, but by scientists in white coats, wielding X-rays, computers, and strands of ancient DNA? For Tutankhamun, the story didn't end with his rediscovery or his treasures. The real revelations were still to come, from within his bones, his blood, and the silent testimony of his golden tomb. When Carter and his team first unwrapped Tutankhamun, they were guided by the best knowledge of their time. They measured the bones, took photographs, and wrote detailed notes. But many questions remained unsolved. How old was he truly? What killed him? Was he murdered, or was he simply a victim of disease and misfortune? Decades passed. Tutankhamun's treasures became icons, but his body remained the greatest puzzle of all. Enter the age of science. In the late 20th and early 21st centuries, new technologies made it possible to re-examine Tutankhamun's mummy in unprecedented detail. Egyptian and international teams, working with state-of-the-art equipment, scanned the boy king's remains, layer by layer, atom by atom. CT scans revealed details the ancient embalmers never dreamed would one day be seen. The king's skull, long the subject of speculation, showed evidence of damage. Was it caused by a blow, an accident, or the mummification process itself? His left foot was severely deformed, his spine curved, and signs of congenital illness were present throughout his skeleton. Genetic testing added new pieces to the puzzle. Samples taken from Tutankhamun, his supposed parents, and other royal mummies revealed a family tree tangled by generations of inbreeding. His father was almost certainly Akhenaten, the heretic king. His mother was likely a full sister to Akhenaten, an unnamed younger lady from a neighboring tomb. The tests also revealed signs of malaria and other infectious diseases, any of which could have contributed to his frail health and early death. The evidence pointed to a tragic conclusion. Tutankhamun was born with genetic weaknesses, likely suffered from chronic pain, and may have died from complications following a broken leg, possibly worsened by malaria and the primitive medical care of his time. The theory of murder, while dramatic, grew less convincing as science advanced. But the mysteries did not end there. Artifacts found in the tomb, walking sticks, board games, hunting equipment, hinted at the king's attempts to live a normal life despite his ailments. The abundance of canes was no accident. Tutankhamun relied on them, even as he was depicted in art as a vigorous hunter and warrior. The real king, like the real Egypt, was both fragile and resilient. Science also revealed new wonders about the world Tutankhamun ruled. Chemical analysis of the artifacts traced perfumes and cosmetics to distant lands, showing the reach of Egypt's trade and influence. Textiles, seeds, and foods found in the tomb gave insight into ancient diets, fashion, and technology. Even the way his tomb was built and decorated, hastily reusing materials, reflected the political chaos of his era. Yet, for every answer, new questions arose. Why was the tomb so small for a king? Was it originally meant for someone else? What happened to Ankhesenamun, the queen who vanished from the record? Could Tutankhamun's death have prevented a greater disaster, or did it mark the true end of a dynasty already doomed? In the end, science and history together painted a new picture of the boy king, not just as a glamorous icon, but as a real complex human being. His life was short, marked by pain and uncertainty, yet he left behind a legacy that would outshine many who reigned far longer. He was at once ordinary and extraordinary, a child of his time, yet an eternal symbol. The story of Tutankhamun is not just a tale of gold and curses, but of what it means to be human, fragile, hopeful, curious, and remembered. The sands of Egypt have given up many secrets, but some mysteries remain, calling us to look deeper, to listen harder, and to wonder what else lies hidden, waiting for its day in the sun. Chapter 16. The Boy King's Legacy. What if the world's most unlikely king became its most famous? If, from a life cut short, an empire erased, and a tomb meant to be forgotten, arose a legacy that would ripple through centuries, changing not just how we see Egypt, but how we see ourselves. Tutankhamun's real treasure was never just gold. It was the story of resurrection, curiosity, and the endless human hunger for mystery. When the world beheld the face of Tutankhamun, it was as if a dream long lost had finally been remembered. The newsreels of the 1920s, black and white, crackling and urgent, showed crowds in London and New York weeping before the king's golden mask, gasping at his inlaid throne, straining to see his rings, his daggers, his childhood toys. The Tut mania that followed was not just a fad, it was an awakening. Suddenly, ancient Egypt was everywhere, in Art Deco buildings, cinema palaces, jazz songs, flapper dresses, and jewelry. The world's designers borrowed the lotus and the scarab. Filmmakers turned mummies into monsters and kings into stars. But for Egypt, Tutankhamun was far more than a curiosity. His tomb's discovery galvanized a new sense of national pride and identity. For the first time, Egyptians could see their ancient history celebrated on the world stage, not as a relic of colonial plunder, but as their own living heritage. Museum crowds grew in Cairo, and the treasures, once destined for Europe, became the centerpiece of Egyptian culture and tourism. The boy king's name was resurrected in every school child's lesson, every archaeologist's dream. Egyptology itself was reborn. Tutankhamun's intact tomb was the ultimate time capsule, a gift to science and storytelling. The way Carter and his team documented every object, every layer of dust, became a new standard for archaeological rigor. Generations of scholars would pore over every bracelet, every piece of bread, every feathered arrow, piecing together not just a king's biography, but a portrait of an entire civilization. The treasures revolutionized our understanding of art, religion, daily life, and politics in the New Kingdom. His funerary mask became the most recognizable symbol of ancient Egypt, its mysterious smile haunting and hopeful at once. In popular culture, Tutankhamun became a canvas for dreams and fears. He appeared in movies and novels, video games and comics, advertising in high fashion. In each new retelling, he was reborn, a romantic hero, a doomed child, a figure of mystery, even a punchline, King Tut, by Steve Martin, immortalized in song and Saturday Night Live skits. But beneath the humor and spectacle, something deeper stirred, the reminder that history is not dead, that the voices of the past still call out, and that the search for meaning is never finished. The story of Tutankhamun also reminded the world of its own fragility. His short reign, marked by illness and uncertainty, was a mirror for our own anxieties, about the brevity of life, the pain of loss, and the hope for something beyond. His treasures, no matter how dazzling, could not protect him from mortality. Yet his name, forgotten for millennia, became immortal, proof that memory is its own kind of afterlife. Today, the mask of Tutankhamun gazes out over new generations, its gold undimmed, its story still unfinished. Exhibitions of his treasures break records, drawing millions to museums around the globe. Scholars continue to debate every detail of his reign, his family, and his death. Children stare in awe at his image, dreaming of deserts, pyramids, and lost worlds. And in Egypt itself, the boy king is everywhere, on stamps, murals, coins, and the hearts of those who claim him not as a legend, but as a piece of their own living soul. What, in the end, is Tutankhamun's true legacy? It is the lesson that the past is never truly gone, that even a forgotten boy, entombed in silence, can return to change the world. It is the power of curiosity, courage, and hope, a reminder that what we seek in the darkness may one day become light. And it is perhaps the quiet voice of the king himself, echoing through time. Do not forget me. Tell my story, for in your memory I am alive.